We have discussed in previous videos how there has been a lot of talk recently about Trump's dire situation in the Electoral College and the swing state trap that he has fallen into. With the end of the DNC, the Trump campaign back on the road, and the 2024 election drawing ever closer, we at Issue Addict wanted to look a bit deeper into the Electoral College as August comes to a close. To preface all of this, we will be using polling from both 270 to Win and 538, both of which are unbiased organizations that gather polling data from numerous sources to try to show national averages. We will also factor in other sources if there is no consensus. Now, let's take a look at the Electoral College as we stand now. To make things a little quicker, we can assume that both candidates will win these states. These are all of the presumed safe states. For our purposes, these are any state polls as of the last week at 5 or more % in favor for one candidate or the other. Now, this covers mostly states that the average American could also predict their vote in. There are a couple of states that we are listing as leaning instead of safe, but they will probably vote for the party indicated here and are polling close to 5%. Virginia is currently sitting at an average polling of plus 3% in favor for Kamala Harris, while Florida is currently at a plus 4% in favor of Trump. Florida has been the most talked about swing state, but with recent trends, we see Florida as being a pretty likely Trump vote. Texas is the real surprise here. For several years now, Democrats have been hopeful about flipping Texas, at least into a swing state. While there have been several failed campaigns, such as those of Beto O'Rourke, Democratic support has been massively growing in the state recently. In a recent Senate poll, Ted Cruz only pulled a 2% lead in his Senate race in the state. Whether because of popular Democratic policies or unpopular Republican ones, the state of Texas as a whole has dipped to a plus 3% lead for Donald Trump against Harris. We still believe the state will go red at this time, but that blue flip is looking more and more likely each month. Now, let's factor in the swing states. We'll start in the West with Arizona and Nevada. According to 538 polling collections, Harris has made a devastating jump over Trump in the past 2 weeks. Over the course of the summer, Trump has held a lead in these two western swing states, but with the Harris campaign momentum, followed by a week of the convention speeches, she has taken a slight lead in both states. In Arizona, Harris has jumped to a 1.2% lead, and in Nevada, a 0.5% lead. Now, these are still both incredibly tight races, but the momentum is with the Harris campaign. If Trump wants to take back these two states that Biden won in 2020, he needs to not only campaign, but also counteract what makes Harris so popular there. While we expect many changes in the race for these two states, this is a massive swing in Harris's favor and gets rid of two formerly Trump-leaning states. Now let's move on to what used to be called the Blue Wall. This is a row of northern states with mid-sized populations and lots of small towns and suburbs, as well as a few big city centers. There are 3 swing states in this former Democratic stronghold, and while Joe Biden won all 3, Harris is looking to solidify Democratic influence there once again. So how is she doing so far? The 3 swing states in this region are Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, Harris's polling lead is safer in these states, but it's not secure yet. In Wisconsin, she is polling at 3.6%, in Michigan at plus 2.9%, and in Pennsylvania at 1.6%. Now, any state with a less than 5% lead is definitely going to be in play during this upcoming election. Don't forget that just earlier this year, Donald Trump had a lead on all of these states. As we have said before, Harris has done nothing but build momentum since taking over the ticket, and we predict this momentum to continue building in this region, solidifying once again the blue wall. The hard-working, middle-class families of this region have had enough of MAGA and are coming back to the Democratic Party. Now, heading down south, there are 2 swing states left: North Carolina and Georgia. Georgia is new to being a swing state, but Joe Biden narrowly won both states in the 2020 election. Kamala Harris knows this, but also knows, particularly in Georgia, that there are large city centers and large African American populations in these states. According to 538, Georgia is polling an average of plus 0.7% in favor of Trump. However, there are a lot of national polls that do put Trump ahead in Georgia by a few percents. As we discussed in a previous video, Harris is planning on spending several days traveling around and campaigning in Georgia, which may just be enough to flip the state in her favor. As for North Carolina, there was a recent poll that showed Harris taking the lead for the first time, but it is currently back down to an average of an exact tie. Both candidates have a polling average of 45.7 according to 538. Now, for those of you doing the math ahead of us, you may have already run into some bad news for Trump. With current polling, Kamala Harris is leading in enough swing states that she would win the election if held today. Even if Trump can get a hold of North Carolina, there are mathematically not enough electoral votes in his favor. And this is devastating news for the Trump campaign. To have an election filled with so many swing states and only have one barely polling for you, especially after they all voted against him in 2020. Now, it's important to keep in mind this race is not over, and any of these states could flip back and forth many times. But it is becoming clearer each day that the Harris campaign's message is resonating with voters and winning moderates over to her side. As things stand, Harris is polling at an Electoral College victory of at least 287, with plenty of votes to crush the MAGA movement once again. We will continue to cover this election in the way that the country is leaning as the race goes on. But remember, these polls can only come true if you make sure that you get out and vote this November.